Hey y'all, this is the very first episode of the Sovereign Individual podcast. Thanks for joining me. I just want to give a quick shout out to Flavor Raid for providing the intro music that you're about to hear. They're awesome local Austin talent, so you should check them out. They've got a new track, Ghosting Me, on Spotify and all other streaming services. And they're going to have a EP release party on May 31st at Stubbs here in Austin, Texas. So thanks again to Flavor Rave for providing the intro music you're about to hear, and thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy episode number 1. Hey y'all, welcome and thanks for being here. This is the inaugural episode of the Sovereign Individual podcast. My name is Eric Guerra and I am going to be your host on this, I guess we could call it a journey, I don't know. Journey of self-discovery. No, that's too corny. Anyway, journey into the kind of philosophy and reasoning behind the liberty movement. Being a libertarian, individual rights, freedom, property rights, all that kind of good stuff, all those talking points of these crazy people that are so obsessed with liberty. So, that's kind of a main hope that I have in the creation of this podcast. I won't say that libertarianism or the liberty movement has become mainstream in any way, but it's being talked about more than I think I've ever seen it talked about, that I can remember. And my hope is that I can provide some insight into the philosophy behind a lot of the ideals and beliefs that come out of libertarianism and the liberty movement, and help folks kind of understand where those thoughts are coming from. It can be in a lot of ways hard to understand why liberty people feel certain ways about certain issues without understanding the underlying philosophy behind the beliefs system that libertarians operate with. So I'll kind of use those terms interchangeably, libertarian and liberty leaning liberty people. So just know that it's not necessarily a member of the Libertarian Party per se when I'm referring to a libertarian, because if you've ever met a libertarian, you'd know that there's a good portion of them that refuse to be involved in the political process in any way, shape, or form. So they're definitely not members of the party, but that's kind of, it's kind of a general theme, or a general statement for kind of any folks within the greater liberty movement, and wanting to move towards a more free society. So I guess we could start with me. Who the hell am I? Why should you listen to this podcast? Why should you care about anything that I have to say? And those are all valid questions. I'm a lover of liberty, and residing in Texas, and doing my best to fight for liberty and freedom here in the beautiful and amazing city of Austin, Texas. I absolutely love it here. I guess I'll just go into my background a little bit and kind of how I came to the movement. So I grew up in Sacramento, California, in the Sacramento area at least of California. Grew up a hardcore conservative Republican. I defined myself as that. I thought those were interchangeable terms as far as I was concerned, and that would have been my main descriptor of myself at that point in time. So I was very interested in politics from a very young age. I think probably a lot of that honestly had to do with 9/11. I was 11 years old when that happened, and once that happened, it was just kind of like, it was eye-opening that something going on, or outside of the scope of the United States, could come home to the United States and result in an event like that. So got really interested in politics, was very, again, like I said, conservative Republican, gung-ho, pro-military. On September 11th, on that Tuesday morning, I decided that I was going to join the military on that day as an 11-year-old, and then for the next 7 years of my life, that was or I guess more like 10 years of my life, really, but the next 10 years of my life, that was the set in stone plan. That was exactly what I was going to do. I got into the University of Texas with a Naval ROTC scholarship, came out to Austin to go to school, and it was in Austin that I kind of started to develop my political philosophy a little bit more, and so it was interesting. You take those political compass quizzes, and I would take them when I was younger, and a lot of times it would come back with libertarian, which would make me angry when I was younger. So I was like, what the hell is a libertarian? I don't even know what that is. I can't be that. I don't even know what it is. I'm a conservative. And so I'd go back in and retake the quiz and adjust answers here or there that I thought would result in conservative coming back, and then it came back conservative, and then I was free to post it on MySpace, bragging about it and being so proud of being so conservative. And so I think it was always there. The libertarian and the liberty leaning individual was always there within me. I think I didn't recognize at that time that my feelings on the scope of government and what it should be and should not be, and what the size should be. I think at that time I was still of the mindset that certain areas regarding morality or stuff like that deserved to have a larger influence by the government, and I think that was kind of why I started out as a hardcore conservative, but also why those quizzes would come back as a libertarian every so often. So I started developing my political philosophy a little bit more once I moved to Austin. And you move out of your parents' house for the first time, you start experiencing new things, and your eyes kind of start to open. And so I realized it kind of all came to a head when I think I must have been 21, maybe 20. I was in my junior year at UT of the first go around, and when I first came to UT, I was studying astronomy because again, I was just concerned with being a naval officer, so I didn't really care, and astronomy seemed like something that was interesting to me. And so I kind of had a crisis of identity, I think would be the best way to describe it. It was a semester where, so to me, astronomy always seemed interesting and cool, and like it would be a really fun major. And then when you take it as a major, it's none of those things. It's all math and physics, and it's incredibly difficult. And you don't really, I was really upset because I didn't get to talk about the cool stuff. Even in my stellar astronomy class, which was an upper division class, it was all math based, and it was like, well, what's the flux coming off a star at this point in space? And I was like, I want to talk about black holes and theoretical cool stuff. So anyway, I kind of had a crisis of identity where I hated the major that I was in, and was over it. It was a semester where I had that stellar astronomy class that I just mentioned. I was taking differential equations. I was taking wave physics, and there's some other class. It might have been elective. I don't know, but I remember just being like, this sucks. And then at the same time, kind of as the crisis of identity was occurring, I was really coming into what my changing beliefs on the United States government, and kind of what it was and what its role was and what purpose it served. For the longest time, I was of the mindset that anything that the United States government did was 100% right, that it could do no wrong, that there was no better service that a person could do than to die. There's no greater honor, I guess I should say. No greater honor than dying in the service of your country, in like a military position, fighting in a war. And that was a belief I'd held pretty strongly ever since 9/11. So, you're looking at about a decade of firmly believing this. And then it's starting to, cracks starting to come in, and my philosophy changing to the point of how I was viewing the government now, and what its role was, what it was conducting, how it was conducting itself around the world, and what my contribution to that would be as a member of the United States Navy. And so it was a real crisis of identity and crisis of faith that occurred there. I had a horrible semester. I think I failed like 2 of my classes, and then I got like a D and a C in the other 2. So I was put on probation, academic probation by the ROTC, and then as a 20 or 21-year-old is wont to do, I reacted by dropping out altogether of both UT and of the ROTC program. Looking back, probably not the best way to handle the situation, but it was just kind of a point where I wasn't going to be able to change my major and remain in the ROTC program, and so I just kind of stepped away from it all, and I'm glad I did. I just worked for a few years, and it helped me get to where I am today. It allowed me to stay in Austin, a city that I'm absolutely in love with. But there's still part of me that kind of regrets it. I loved my time in ROTC. I loved all the summer trainings that I went on. I met some of the best people that I've ever met. One of my best friends in my life I met because of ROTC, and we lived together all throughout college. Shout out to you, Strain. I love you, buddy. But so around that time, this was 2010, 2011, and so I took that political compass quiz again, and it came back libertarian again. And so I said, all right, I'm going to check out what this thing's all about. And so I voted for Gary Johnson in 2012. And then I officially started participating in the political process with the Libertarian Party in 2014, and have been doing so ever since. So I'm active both within the Libertarian Party, and then within different activist organizations here in Austin, Texas, that promote liberty and freedom in a smaller government and smaller influence of the government. So that's a little bit about me and my journey, and kind of how I got to where I am philosophically. There's a lot more to it, and I'm sure a lot more that we'll get into as this podcast moves along, and different subjects are touched on, and different personal experiences are brought up and whatnot. But just kind of wanted to give a little bit of an intro. And so when I returned to the University of Texas, Hook'em, I changed my major to government. I'm not sure why. The University of Texas at Austin doesn't have political science as a major, but figured government was close enough. So it was a much different class experience being in those, and I was far more interested and far more engaged at that point. So we'll talk about that again here in a little bit, that second go around at UT, later on here in the episode, as I kind of talk about the ideas of collectivism, and then kind of a reason that this podcast was started. So so that's me. And why am I starting this podcast? One of the biggest reasons is education. I feel like for too long now, whenever ideas of liberty or libertarians, quote unquote, ideas are brought up in any sort of, like, the corporate media or mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, any sort of mainstream platform, it's very rarely ever actual libertarians talking about it. It's typically people from either the right or the left, somewhere on the political spectrum, that are talking about it and defining what a libertarian is. And it's incredibly frustrating, one, because they have no obligation to be honest or to accurately represent the beliefs of the libertarian movement, and two, it's just, not only do they not have any reason to accurately portray them, they're so inclined to spread disinformation about what it is that libertarians believe, and what libertarian positions are or views are. And so part of it is just, I'm tired of libertarians and the liberty movement being defined by Democrats and Republicans predominantly. So the goal of this podcast is to get another voice out there, another liberty voice out there, to give a better understanding of why it is so many of us feel the way that we feel, where these beliefs come from, the philosophy behind them. And I think that would kind of hopefully help people understand it a little bit better. Because I see a lot of things, even not necessarily by political pundits, or not even necessarily on a corporate media show, but like, for an example, I've seen this multiple times in maybe different formats or different phrasings, but the kind of general sentiment is that I've seen is the accusation that libertarians believe that property rights are more important than human rights. And if you are unfamiliar with the liberty movement and libertarians and what they believe, and you were to hear libertarians talk about property rights, I can see where you would think that, and you would believe that, they absolutely 100% feel that property rights are more important than human rights. I mean, just listen to the way they talk about property rights, listen to the way they hold them up, listen why, how they consider it so much more important than this other whatever issue it is. But that shows a lack of understanding of the philosophy behind libertarianism, because when you say that, the first thing I think of when I read that sentiment of libertarians believe property rights are more important than human rights, my knee-jerk reaction is property rights are human rights. And that's exactly what people within the liberty movement believe. Those aren't two separate things. It's not property rights and human rights. They're the same thing. Property rights are human rights. And the most important piece of property that you own is yourself, your body, your actions, your thoughts, your words. You own that, and nobody has a right to infringe upon that in any way, shape, or form, especially not a government entity. So, like something like that, I see it, and again, understand where you might believe that, if you were unfamiliar with the philosophy behind libertarianism. But it doesn't make it any less frustrating, because for me, I'm like, that's a blatant misrepresentation of the way I feel and what I believe. And I legitimately do not see a difference between the two. And I think the most important human right that you have is your property rights. And again, the most important piece of property that you own is yourself. And the rights to your, so it's the name of the podcast, The Sovereign Individual. That's why I named the podcast is, you are a sovereign individual given these rights by birth. If you want to say natural rights, if you want to say with, if you're more religious and you want to say it comes from a higher power, whatever you want to believe, you as an individual are given those by birth. Those are your rights by birth, and no state has the right to infringe upon those. And those rights aren't given to you by a piece of paper written a couple hundred years ago, or whatever, 1,000 years ago, whatever you want to do. They don't come from a piece of paper. They're yours. They're yours the second that you're born. And it's a very important concept, especially in the liberty movement, the idea of the individual. And that's why I'm going to get into here in a bit the Dangers of Collectivism, and why that's the first title of this, because collectivism tends to remove the idea of the individual. But yeah, that's a huge tenet of the liberty movement and libertarianism, is the individual and the self-ownership of the individual. And so that's kind of a big reason when I see something like that, and I see the lack of knowledge of the philosophy behind libertarian beliefs. I want to do what I can to help at least make people aware of the philosophy behind certain things. Not that if you come to agree and you think I make really great points and you're like, yeah, I can get on board with this liberty thing, awesome. If you still disagree, totally fine as well. I just would hope that you kind of have a better understanding of where it's coming from, and don't think automatically of libertarians as being these crass, uncaring individuals who, just hold on to these certain rights that they think are more important than anything else. There's a deep and profound philosophy behind it that's very important to the movement and to individuals within the movement. And so I want to kind of get that across and get my voice out there to try to hopefully help people better understand that. So that's one of the reasons why I'm starting this. Another one is honestly kind of selfish, I guess, in a way. It's going to be a form of catharsis for me. I have a lot of feelings about a lot of things politically, and this, I think, is the best medium for me to be able to get those off of my chest. Twitter is not a great medium for it. You're limited in your characters. You can make one of those thread chains where you stack tweets on top of each other, and there's some really great ones that I've read before, and they've been super informative and really offered some great insight. But I mean, I'd be doing like at least one a day, if not more, on Twitter, and I don't have the time or the inclination to go through and do that, and I certainly wouldn't expect people to go through and read multiple threads like that a day. So I keep it more short and concise on Twitter. Facebook would be a good medium for it because there's no real limit on the post. You could damn near write a novel if you want on a Facebook post, and it would be, there's nothing stopping you from posting it. But as anybody who's ever posted anything remotely political on Facebook can attest to, you come back and there's like 75 comments and 4 different distinct arguments and debates occurring within the comments, and all of a sudden your aunt is arguing with some kid you had like one elective class with in college, and you just look at it and you're like, what? I mean, nobody's changing anybody's minds here. Everybody's just set in stone and just arguing back and forth. And so the few times I have made political posts on Facebook, I never reply to any comments or comment on it further. I felt like I said my piece and I'm going to leave it be. And if people want to argue in the comments, that's their prerogative. So I feel like this offers me a really great medium to just kind of get things off my chest, hopefully maybe open eyes of listeners to some things maybe they weren't aware of, maybe educate you on some things you weren't aware of that have occurred or that are going on, or what have you. So the hope here is that you get something out of this, and that you come back and, hey, if this thing takes off, that would be great. If it never takes off and it's pretty much just like my mom and my girlfriend and my close friends listening to it, that's fine too. Again, this is in a lot of ways just for me, to get these things spoken and out and no longer on my mind, and and in a lot of ways for my girlfriend Kate too, so that she doesn't have to be a soundboard for my rants about the government anymore, and that she can kind of get, I guess, pick and choose when she wants to be exposed to a political anti-government rant by Eric. So I'm sure she'll be appreciative of me using this medium as well. I guess one quick thing. I'm going to do my best to use quote-unquote appropriate language. I don't really like that term. I don't really think that there's much language at all that's inappropriate. Kind of words have the power that you give them, and so I've certainly, anybody who knows me and who's interacted with me in person knows, I certainly am not afraid to talk like a sailor, but I know that in order to reach kind of a wider audience and hopefully make more people aware of the things that I'm trying to get across here, it helps to not be talking like a sailor. So I'm going to do my best to keep the language that of a PG movie, I guess you could say. And if there are episodes where there's heavy language, I will put a warning at the beginning of the episode to give people a choice on whether they want to hear it. I do eventually plan on doing having guests on and doing long form conversations, and those, I would never tell somebody to kind of censor themselves or watch what they say or try to speak in a certain way or refrain from using words. So I'm sure those will get into some murky waters as far as that goes. And again, I'll offer a warning anytime there's excessive language that people need to be aware of. So, Mom, that one's for you, so you can know which ones you may want to skip over. And so one final thought before we kind of dive into the theme of this episode. You'll hear me at times use some terms that are kind of known within the liberty movement, but are going to probably sound weird to people who aren't aware. I think one that I'm thinking of specifically right now that I'll probably end up using significantly is ANCAP, which is short for Anarcho-Capitalist, which is kind of something I would define myself as generally. I think as with anything, it's hard to completely define yourself by a single ideology, but I feel that that's probably a pretty accurate description of my beliefs on a lot of things. So an anarcho-capitalist, kind of an easy, super Cliff's Notes version of what it is basically I trust the free market more than I trust any sort of government entity or bureaucratic anything that the government does. So again, that's super Cliff Notes. There's way more nuance to it, things that we'll get into as the podcast moves along and we get into different ideas, but the easiest way I think to describe it is just where your trust lies, and what you'd be willing to trust with any sort of influence or interaction with your life. So if you hear me refer to myself as an ANCAP or ANCAP ideology, It's ANCAP, ANCAP. That's where it comes from, Anarcho-Capitalist. So something we'll get into a lot more as we move along. But kind of a final reason why I wanted to start this podcast was the 2016 election. And it was fascinating to watch, especially being in my final year or semester. I don't even know. Yeah, I guess my final year-ish, final couple semesters at UT when the primary season was really ramping up, kind of at the end of 2015 and then at the beginning of 2016. And watching professors who have been teaching and studying election cycles for decades, we'd be sitting there in class and something would happen that Trump did or said, and we'd kind of come to the conclusion, okay, this is where his campaign starts to go off the rails. This is where the numbers are going to start dropping, and we're going to see him fall out of the race because you just can't recover from something like this. And then his numbers wouldn't change. And then something else would happen, and we'd be, okay, well, this is it. And then the numbers wouldn't change. Something else would happen. Okay, this is really, you can't survive this. And he would. And it was fascinating to watch these professors who have studied this for decades just kind of shrug their shoulders, throw up their hands, and just say, I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. And this doesn't follow any sort of historical trend that we can measure or that we've seen. They're at a loss, as I think a lot of people were in many ways. But it wasn't as surprising when you kind of look at where politics have been moving, especially within the old parties. Excuse me. And the frustration with the establishment and of both of the older parties. That's why Bernie was so successful too. If the DNC hadn't stolen the primaries from him and given them to Hillary, we would have had two outsider, non-establishment candidates running as the candidates for the old parties. So I don't think it was necessarily specifically a Trump thing. I think it was more what he represented in the anti-establishment thing, in the same way that Bernie represented that anti-establishment in the Democratic Party. But anyway, so as we've entered into the Trump age, the Trump administration, I think we've seen collectivism become far more prominent, which is in no small part due to the internet and social media and where it's come. Because I can remember the Bush administration and the vitriol and the hatred that he received during his time in office. I don't believe that it was any more than what Trump is receiving right now. I think it was just less in your face than at that time than it is now, because even then, you had the 24-hour news cycle, but you had to tune in. You had to tune into CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whichever channel in order to be exposed to whatever was going on. And then kind of Obama comes into office in 2008, and he's the first president that has a Twitter. I remember I got my Facebook page in 2008 when I graduated high school, and that was kind of in my head. I was like, all right, I'm not getting a Facebook page till I graduate high school. I'll just stick to MySpace until then. And so in Obama's administration, we really saw the explosion of social media, the use of social media to get out news, political ideas, sports, all that kind of stuff. It's exploded, and now we're at a point where you cannot get away from it almost. You open up any social media platform, and odds are you're going to be exposed to something political within like 30 seconds maybe of opening it. I have no idea. It sure seems that way. That may be me because I follow a lot of political stuff, but it sure seems like it's not something that you can escape. So I think it seems louder, and there seems to be more hate and vitriol towards Trump than there was towards Bush, but I really don't think it was. I mean, Bush was referred to as literally Hitler, as Satan, and that was more so for his actions in the war in Iraq, which makes me miss the anti-war left even more now. I really thought the anti-war left was going to come back in the age of Trump, but I think it's just mostly gone at this point. But so with the internet, it's much easier to see kind of collectivism take its root and take its form. So why is collectivism a dangerous thing? So it, in and of itself, collectivism isn't wrong or dangerous. It's kind of a natural occurrence. You're naturally going to kind of associate with and seek out like-minded individuals, people who believe the same things you do, who like the same things you do, who watch the same type of TV shows, consume the same type of media, read the same type of books, enjoy the same type of hobbies or activities or anything like that. So in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with seeking out like-minded individuals and hanging out with them and interacting with them. The problem is that as you get deeper into collectivism, and when it comes into the sphere of politics, it creates a we, and we becomes a very dangerous thing. It's very susceptible to groupthink, and when you begin to think of things in a we mindset, and you stop thinking about things as an individual or in an individualist mindset, it creates a very dangerous kind of storm of possibilities. So like in an extreme, and so the problem is, so it creates a we, and you start to view yourself as part of a we, as part of this group, as part of a we. We are the good guys. We know what's best. We're on the right side of history, whatever people are saying, and then consequently it creates a they, and they are the bad guys. They are on the wrong side of history. They believe the wrong things. They espouse to the wrong ideals, all that kind of stuff. And so all of this takes away the idea of individuality and puts things into like a group type thing. And so when you get into something like this, you get like an extreme example would be like Khashoggi, where you have a group of individuals murder a journalist with a chainsaw, cut him into pieces, and dispose of him in trash bags. I mean, there's sick individuals that exist, and sick individuals that would do something like that, but those are multiple different people, individuals who were involved in that process, because they viewed themselves as a we, their country as a we, the Saudi prince as part of the we that needed to be protected, and they viewed Khashoggi not as an individual, not as a person, but as part of the they. They need to be eradicated, they need to be silenced, they need to be stopped, because they are threatening the security of us, the we, and they're saying disparaging things about our leader, who's the Saudi prince. So that's an extreme example, but that's kind of where that mindset can take you to. And so collectivism in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but when you start to view the they and the we in terms of only that and not as individuals, and you lose the and you no longer view the other side as people that are human and capable of growth or of change or of coming to realizations and different beliefs, you get into kind of I think part of what we've gotten into now, where you can't even have conversations with a lot of people when it comes to political stuff. I think we've done an entire generation a great disservice by saying don't talk about religion or politics, because now we don't know how to, by and large. People don't know how to have a civil conversation with somebody that they disagree with on things, or about something that they disagree with, without it devolving into a shouting match. In a lot of cases, again, not all, but by and large. And then especially when you throw the internet in, it's really easy to do it there. It's really easy to, behind the security of a keyboard, insult, belittle, and demean somebody who disagrees with you, instead of trying to engage in any sort of rational or intelligent conversation to maybe try to better understand where they're coming from and why they feel the way that they feel. So that's kind of part of, again, another reason why I'm starting this, is I want to hopefully show, when I have guests on who have varying, different views about issues, and I want to talk with them about those differences in views, to show that kind of civil discourse can still occur, and it can occur when talking about something that you vehemently disagree on, and that at the very least you can come to an understanding of why people feel the way that they feel. And it's okay to disagree with people, but it doesn't help when you're incapable of being able to discuss anything with somebody that you disagree with, or more importantly, discuss the thing that you disagree with them on. And so that's kind of another reason that I'm starting this, and why I want to have guests on. So we'll get more into that later on. But so back to kind of collectivism and the dangers of it. So you've got the we and the they that occurs, and so that creates the opportunity for violence and war as well. It's a very common tactic used by the state. I'll get into that real quick too. During this, you'll often hear me use the term the state. That refers to just kind of government in general. It's not necessarily about a single entity or a single government. At times it will be, just kind of context clues. If I'm ranting about the U.S. government and then I say the state, that's probably what I'm referring to. But yeah, so that just means any form of government, really, just the idea of government in general. So, but the state, it's a common tactic to use the idea of a they as the enemy that needs to be defeated, and to use it as a justification of going to war. And war is honestly, war is the worst. War is part of the worst thing that the state does. The worst thing that the state does is kill their own citizens, kill citizens of different countries. It's the worst thing that results, and it's unfortunately, one of the things that the state is best at, and then especially when it comes to war, the idea of a we versus they, it's the easiest way to justify getting into an armed conflict with another country, and so that's where collectivism gets really dangerous too, where you're viewing an entire country or an entire area of the world as a they, and that they're the enemy and that they need to be destroyed. And again, it takes out the individual, it takes out the idea of looking at them as fellow human beings, as fellow individuals, and you just start looking at them as a they. And then you don't really, you don't feel bad, or you don't necessarily care or have sympathy for deaths that are caused when they are the ones that are suffering. So, I mean, you look at, like when I say the state, the worst thing the state can do is kill people, and that's unfortunately what it's best at. I mean, you look no further than the 20th century as to how much death and destruction the state is capable of. I mean, if you just look at strictly, the easiest go-to is obviously Nazi Germany, where you had 13 million people that were murdered by the state. Then you have the communist, socialist regimes of the Soviet Union and Mao Zedong's China. We don't even know the exact numbers on either of those, but you can pretty comfortably say you're in the 150 million to 200 million range of people that were killed by the state in those regimes. And then if you start adding in the deaths that occurred as a result of war in the 20th century, if you look at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, those are civilian cities where the United States dropped nuclear, or I guess atomic at the time, atomic warheads on, instantly killing hundreds of thousands of people. Just with the use of 2 bombs. And then you factor in, the rest of the wars that were occurring in the 20th century, and you're looking at somewhere probably in the range of 300 to 400 million people that were killed as a direct result of state action. And that's kind of where it gets really dangerous too when it comes to the state. The state exists, it has a monopoly on the use of violence. And when I say that, what I mean by that is the state can ultimately use it ultimately can, and it ultimately has to, in a lot of ways, use violence to enforce its laws and to enforce its policies. Whereas, by and large, you as an individual don't have a way of you can't use violence in order to justify what you believe in, or to get what you want. In a lot of ways, when you think about it, any law that's written, okay, if you break the law, there's fines, maybe if it's a small one, and then if you don't want to pay the fines, then all right, we're gonna put you in a cage then, and you're gonna get locked in a cage, and so somebody with a gun is gonna come and put you in a cage, and if you refuse to go in the cage, then you're gonna be killed. That's kind of what I mean when I talk about the monopoly of violence. Is if you try to do that as a civilian, if somebody wasn't doing what you wanted them to, and so you tried to lock them in a cage, you tried to extort them, and then when they refused to be extorted, you tried to lock them in a cage, and then when you tried to lock them in the cage and they wouldn't, you killed them, you'd be charged with murder. Whereas that's not the case by and large when it comes to the actions of the state. So when I use that term monopoly of violence, that's kind of what I mean, being that the state can only exist through either the actual use of violence or the threat of violence being used in order to keep enforce its policies and its laws. So when you have an entity like that that has that kind of power and has the ability to use violence to its own ends, and then you combine that with collectivism, it gets into a really dangerous thing where you have the possibility of wars with other nations, like I was saying, where you have a we and a they, and they need to be defeated, and then it's able to justify the killing of civilians. It's able to, I mean, not really justify, but in the minds of those conducting it, or in the minds of those involved in the collective, it justifies it. Drone strikes on weddings in the Middle East to kill one person, and you happen to take out 200 other people, but it's okay because it was the one person that you were trying to kill. That kind of stuff happens as a result of collectivist thinking. And then it also, when you're talking about the dangers of the dangers of collectivism being mixed with the power of a state, and the violence that can come with the state. You look at something like the Soviet Union, or or Mao Zedong's China. The Great Leap Forward, when they took control of all the farms, and instead of having the farmers who actually knew how to do farming and knew how to grow crops and everything like that, you had the state running all the farms, and mass starvation that occurred, or the mass starvation and the gulags that occurred in the Soviet Union. You get the collectivism that occurs within a country where it's the political elite and those in power view themselves as a we, and then there's the rest of them, the non-ruling class, the peasants, the common citizens, the middle class, whatever you want to call them. They're the they, and the political elite, the we, they know what's best for the country, so they are able to hold on real quick, I'm gonna have to pause this. You won't notice, but I'm gonna have to come back to this real quick. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, so you got the we of the political elite, and you got the they of the rest of the country. And so, because the political elite, the ruling class, the we know what's best. We know what's best moving forward for the country. We know what's best as far as how the government should operate. We know what's best for everyone involved. So it's okay if they suffer a little bit. It's okay if some of them starve. It's okay if we have to throw some of them in the gulag for being dissenters of what we're trying to do, because we know what's best. And what we're doing is for the greater good. And so that gets into a situation where you have people being completely okay with mass starvation occurring within their own country. And the mass starvation that occurred within the Soviet Union and within China, and the gulag that existed in Russia, where political dissidents were thrown into the gulag, tortured, and murdered for disagreeing with the actions of the government. Shit, if I would be in the gulag for making this podcast if the United States were like that, and it may be one day. I might end up in a FEMA camp. Who knows? But that's for another time. But that's the sheer amount of death and destruction and pain that can be inflicted by the state is the reason why myself and so many people within libertarianism or the liberty movement, whatever you want to call it, why we want to completely limit the scope and the influence and the power of the state. there's varying degrees of how much limitation we want to see occur, and to each their own. I kind of liken it to a train, and there's this train and it's moving towards more freedom and more liberty and smaller government. And I'm of the thought that I want to be on the train until it reaches the point where government doesn't exist anymore. That may seem like a pipe dream or completely insane or crazy to some people. I think as technology advances, it's going to offer us opportunities for that kind of thing. But that's where I want to go. That's the destination I want to move towards. But there's going to be other people who are on the train that want to move towards liberty and freedom. And there's going to be stops along the way. And those stops are going to be the government limited in different ways and being smaller in different ways. And it's kind of a mindset that, okay, you can get off wherever you feel comfortable. If the government is no longer involved in the thing that you didn't want it involved in, and that was the only thing that you didn't want it involved in, you get off at that stop. If it's reached a point where it's small enough in your eyes and it's staying true to the Constitution and not wiping its ass with it, and you feel comfortable, you get off at that stop. If it reaches a point where everything is the federal government is pretty much null and void in a lot of ways and only concerned with national defense, and everything else is decided upon by the states and local governments, and we're getting smaller in that way and we're localizing it, and that's what you want to see, you get off at that stop. But that's kind of how I'm viewing it, is as a train, and kind of moving in the same direction, hopefully with a lot of people, and then deciding where you feel comfortable getting off the train at. So that's kind of what I like to liken the movement and the idea of liberty to. So that's why libertarians are so concerned with the state and any power that it has and any power that it uses, because there is no rival for the amount of death and destruction that has occurred in humankind. Even if you want to bring in religion to it, which I know a lot of people do, because they say so many people have been killed in the name of religion. Yes, it has occurred in the name of religion, but through the use of the state. The Crusades were funded and conducted by the state. It was for religious ends and for religious means, but the states were the one funding it. So you look at stuff like that, and even if it's a religious reasoning for it, the state is the mechanism that allows that kind of destruction and death to occur. So that's why we get so crazy passionate when it comes to the state. That's why you'll hear somebody like me, where I come off as very anti-state and very anti-government, and it's about power, and it's about control, and it's about how comfortable do you feel with an entity holding that kind of power and control. And for me, it's not comfortable at all, and for a lot of people it is comfortable, and that's something that they like and that they're comfortable with. And that's what I kind of tell people. I tell my friends who are socialists is, that's fine. You want a libertarian society, because in a libertarian society, nobody's going to bother you in your community if you want to have a completely socialist community, as long as you aren't aggressing against anyone else, as long as you aren't forcing people to join you or forcing people to stay. You can do whatever you want to do, and we'll allow you to do that, and we'll be over here and we'll be doing our libertarian thing, and there may be some conservative community that's doing their thing however they want to do it. The point is, what it all comes back to in a lot of ways is this idea of the non-aggression principle. You'll hear that brought up a lot by people who are in the liberty movement or who are libertarian movement. They'll call it the NAP sometimes, the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle. What it is essentially is it's, I mean, the name of it kind of gives it all. Don't aggress against peaceful individuals. If you do not bring aggression against me, I won't bring aggression against you. So it allows for self-defense, but it's a very kind of laissez-faire thing. If I may not agree with everything that you believe in or the way in which you want to live your life, but if you are willing to allow me to peacefully exist and to live my life as I see fit, I'm going to do the same to you. And I'll agree to not aggress against you, and you agree to not aggress against me. And so that's kind of a big core tenet of the liberty movement, and kind of where a lot of this idea comes from, and why there's such animosity towards the state from the liberty movement. So, yeah, I mean, the enemy of the state, the greatest threat, the greatest enemy, the enemy of the state is the individual. It's the greatest threat to the power of the state. It's why I named this podcast The Sovereign Individual. The state does not want a bunch of individual free thinkers willing to question and willing to think critically and willing to refuse to just go about things the way that they've always been, because that's the way it is. That's a threat to the state and to their control and to their power. The state wants collectivist mindset. It wants people thinking as a we. It wants people thinking as other people as a they, and it wants to divide us in those ways so that we're easier to control. And it doesn't want us to view each other as individuals, and it definitely doesn't want people acting as individuals with individual thoughts and ideas. So that's kind of the first episode, talking about collectivism. I hope you learned maybe some things that you didn't know before, see some things in a way that you hadn't seen them. I'm sure if you're not familiar with libertarianism, you're being exposed to some ways of thinking and looking at things that you've never experienced before. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast. I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you stick around. I'm going to be releasing 3 episodes all at once, so you'll be able to hear some more ideas about different liberty stuff. The next episode, episode 2, is going to be about Venezuela and what's going on there, and just kind of give my thoughts on it and kind of coming at it from a libertarian perspective. So looking forward to recording that one, and again, it's going to be fun, and I'm looking forward to talking more and having some guests on. So it's going to be over an hour. Kind of the first half of this episode was a lot of... Sorry about that. So the first half of this episode was kind of an intro into what this is going to be. So my guess is most episode lengths are probably going to be like 30 minutes to 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. It just kind of depends. Obviously, certain conversation or certain topics are going to be longer, and there's going to be more to go into and deeper ideas to get into. So it all just kind of depends. I'm not looking for like a hard cutoff time at the moment. Maybe at some point I will, but just kind of want to be able to talk about everything I want to talk about and get to the points I want to get to. So and then as far as the guests, when I have guests, I want to do definitely more long form conversations. So those will be more like 1.5 to 2 hour long episodes, because I really want to. There's some really cool people. It's going to start with people in the Austin area. I've met a lot of really cool people doing some really cool things with a variety of different beliefs and ideas and everything like that. So I want to kind of try to keep it local for the start of the guests. So there's going to be some really cool things to talk about, and I want to have enough time to get into everything. So those will be pretty long conversations. And then as far as frequency goes, at least once a week, probably 2 or 3 episodes a week, just depending on how much is going on and how likely. So I haven't quite picked a day when I'm going to definitely release an episode every week. Probably looking at like a Tuesday for every single Tuesday having an episode come out, and then kind of maybe Thursdays, and maybe on a Saturday or something like that. We'll see how things go. So this is all new. I'm gonna kind of figure it out along the way, and we'll just kind of see where this goes and what comes of it. But just wanted to thank you once again for listening. I really appreciate it. And I will see y'all in the next episode talking about Venezuela. But just remember, you're a sovereign individual, and that's yours by birth, and nobody can take that away from you, especially not the state. So thanks y'all, and we'll see you soon.